You were born cold, hungry, and surrounded by a world that didn't care whether you survived to see your next winter. The reality of becoming a Viking was nothing like the legends that would be told centuries later, because the path from farmer to raider was carved through years of back-breaking labour, harsh lessons about honour and shame, and the slow transformation of a boy who wanted to live into a man willing to die. But who could even become a Viking? Well, Viking society was divided into 3 distinct classes that determined a person's place from birth, and this structure shaped who could realistically become a warrior. At the top were the Jarls, the wealthy nobles who owned large areas of land, wielded political influence, and led warriors in battle, though their sons were destined for leadership rather than the common raiding life. Below them were the Karls, the free men who formed the backbone of Norse society as independent farmers, traders, and craftsmen, and it was primarily from this class that Viking warriors emerged. The Karls owned their own land, had full protection under Viking law, and could choose to take up arms when opportunities for raids arose, which meant the majority of Vikings were not professional soldiers, but rather farmers who periodically became warriors when the chance for wealth and glory presented itself. At the bottom of society were the Thralls, the enslaved people who had been captured during raids or born into servitude, and these individuals had absolutely no rights under law and no possibility of becoming warriors unless they somehow earned or bought their freedom. The reality was that becoming a Viking warrior required being born free, having a family that could afford to spare you from farm work during raid seasons, and possessing the physical capability to survive both the journey and the violence that awaited. Not everyone who wanted to raid could afford to do so, because someone had to stay behind to tend the crops, manage the livestock, and keep the household functioning, which meant younger sons often had better chances than eldest sons who were needed to inherit and manage family land. Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and if you enjoy video like this, be sure to like the video and subscribe. Life before the raids, harsh reality. The daily existence of a young Norse farmer was defined by relentless physical labor from sunrise to sunset, 6 days a week throughout every season. Viking Age society was overwhelmingly rural, in a way that modern people struggle to comprehend, with almost everyone living on small farmsteads that produced most goods used by the household. And this subsistence-level existence meant that survival depended entirely on your own labor and the labor of your family. Farming in Scandinavia was perilous and grueling work that required incredible inputs of effort to accomplish even simple tasks, and the harsh northern climate made every harvest uncertain. You grew barley, oats, and rye as your primary crops, raised cattle for milk rather than meat because dairy products could be preserved longer, and kept sheep, goats, and pigs that represented wealth your family couldn't afford to lose. Famines were common, and disease took a terrible toll on the population, with archaeological evidence showing that 30 to 40% of children died before reaching adulthood. The skeletons recovered from Viking Age burial sites tell a story that contradicts the modern image of Vikings as healthy, strong, and virile warriors, because these bones show significant evidence of disease, injury, malnutrition, and the physical toll that constant labor extracted from human bodies. You lived in a longhouse made of wood and turf that you shared with your entire family, and sometimes your livestock, gathered around a single fire for warmth during the long, dark northern winters, and endured conditions where comfort was a luxury that simply didn't exist. The cold was constant, food was often scarce, and the work never ended, because every task from making bread to repairing tools had to be done by hand without any of the conveniences later generations would take for granted. Women handled tasks within the threshold of the house, such as producing clothing, preparing food, making alcoholic drinks, and creating dairy products like butter and cheese, while men were charged with outdoor labor, including farming, hunting, fishing, and any ironworking or specialized crafts the household required. Training and preparation. Viking warriors didn't undergo formal military training like medieval knights or Roman soldiers, but instead learned the skills of warfare through practical experience that began in early childhood and continued throughout adolescence. Boys started training as young as 3 years old by playing with wooden swords and practicing with leather-covered spears designed not to cause serious injury. And these games were not just entertainment, but deliberate preparation for the violence that might define their adult lives. Wrestling was one of the most popular activities and something boys practiced throughout the year, and through these matches they developed speed, agility, and the reflexes needed for close combat situations. The Vikings took game rules seriously and enforced them strictly, with those who broke the rules during play committing eneid and being called nidinga, which was one of the worst insults in Viking Age society because it implied a person lacked honor and couldn't be trusted to follow basic codes of conduct. As boys grew older, their training intensified to include hunting and farm work that built the strength, endurance, and survival skills essential for warriors, and they practiced with real weapons, including swords, axes, and spears, through sparring sessions with family members and trusted companions. Physical conditioning emphasized endurance, strength, and agility to prepare bodies for the demands of combat, and boys learned seafaring skills, including navigation and ship handling, because Viking raids depended entirely on the ability to cross dangerous waters in longships. By adolescence, young men were often taken on trading voyages or smaller raids to gain real-world experience, and the sagas describe these youths as eager to prove themselves in battle because they understood that honor and reputation began in youth and would follow them throughout their lives. The education wasn't limited to physical skills, because boys also learned the warrior code through oral tradition, including sagas, myths, and poems that taught the values of courage, loyalty, and accepting one's fate with dignity. Family pressure and reputation. Honor and reputation were not abstract concepts in Viking society, but rather the foundation of a person's entire existence, and losing honor was genuinely considered worse than death. A man's worth was measured by his reputation, which was built through his words, his actions, his generosity, and his willingness to face danger without showing cowardice. And this meant that every decision carried weight because communities remembered and judged everything you did. Family pressure to uphold the household's honor was immense because your actions didn't just affect you, but reflected on your entire kin group, extending to parents, siblings, and even distant relatives who shared your family name. The Norse believed that life was governed by fate, with goddesses called Norns spinning the threads of each person's destiny, and this belief that everything was predetermined actually increased rather than decreased the pressure to act bravely, because cowardice in the face of destined death was seen as shameful. Young men grew up hearing stories about ancestors who had earned glory, accumulated wealth through successful raids, or died bravely in battle and earned their place in Valhalla, and these tales created expectations that each generation would live up to the standards set by those who came before. Parents, especially fathers, explicitly taught their sons that bravery was essential and that facing death fearlessly proved one's character, with sagas preserving conversations where fathers told sons that nothing could kill a man before his time, and therefore being afraid was pointless. The community watched everything, and a man who showed cowardice, broke his word, or failed to defend his family's honor would be remembered and shamed, potentially for generations. This pressure extended beyond just military prowess to include keeping oaths, showing loyalty to chieftains and companions, practicing generosity by sharing wealth rather than hoarding it, and maintaining the complex web of social obligations that held Viking communities together. Why people chose raiding. The decision to go Viking, to leave your farm and join a raid, was driven by a combination of economic necessity, social pressure, and the genuine belief that gaining wealth and reputation through raiding was not just acceptable, but honorable. Farming in Scandinavia was hard, the land was often poor, and many families struggled to produce enough surplus to improve their circumstances or provide for growing numbers of children, which meant that raiding offered a way to acquire wealth that would otherwise take generations of labor to accumulate. Successful raids could bring back silver, gold, fine textiles, weapons, tools, and enslaved people who could be sold or put to work, and this wealth wasn't just for personal enrichment, but served important political purposes by allowing men to give gifts that ensured alliances and loyalty within their communities. A Karl who gained enough wealth from raiding could elevate his social status and potentially become a Jarl, which meant that raiding was one of the few paths to upward mobility in an otherwise rigid social structure. Beyond economics, there was the matter of reputation and the warrior culture that pervaded Norse society, where young men sought glory and the opportunity to prove themselves worthy of the sagas that might be told about them. The Vikings believed that dying bravely in battle was the greatest honor because it ensured entry into Valhalla, Odin's hall for fallen warriors, where they would feast and fight until Ragnarok, and this belief made death in combat something to embrace rather than fear. The alternative to raiding was remaining a farmer for your entire life, working the same difficult land, facing the same uncertain harvests, and never accumulating enough wealth to significantly improve your family's circumstances or leave a legacy that would be remembered. For young men who had been training since childhood, who had heard the sagas of great warriors, and who understood that their society valued martial prowess above almost everything else, choosing to go Viking wasn't really a choice at all, but rather the natural progression of everything they had been raised to become. The transformation, farmer to warrior. The shift from farmer to raider wasn't instantaneous, but rather a gradual transformation that changed not just what you did, but who you were. And this process began long before you ever set foot on a long ship. You had spent years watching older men return from raids with stories of battles fought, treasures won, and companions lost, and these tales shaped your understanding of what awaited you and created expectations about the kind of man you needed to become. The physical preparation was tangible and could be measured in growing strength, improving weapon skills, and increasing endurance. But the mental preparation was more subtle and involved learning to accept that violence was not just a possibility, but a certainty. You practiced killing through hunting, butchering animals, and understanding that ending life was a necessary skill, and you learned to think of combat not as something terrifying, but as a test that would reveal your worth as a man. The transformation required you to internalize the warrior code until bravery wasn't something you had to consciously choose, but rather your default response to danger, and this meant training yourself to suppress the natural human instinct for self-preservation in favor of maintaining honor and reputation. You learned to value your oath to your chieftain and your companions above your own life, understanding that breaking faith was worse than dying, and you accepted that your fate was predetermined, which meant that showing fear was pointless, because you would die when the Norns decided and not before. By the time you were ready to join your first raid, you had become someone different from the boy who once only knew farming, because years of training, family pressure, cultural conditioning, and the grinding reality of subsistence existence had transformed you into a man who could board a longship knowing that some of those who sailed with you would never return. Soon you would board that ship, and everything you had trained for, everything your family expected, and everything your society valued would be put to the test. Becoming a Viking was not a moment, but a process that consumed years of childhood and adolescence, transforming farmers into warriors through harsh necessity, cultural pressure, and the genuine belief that raiding was honorable. The reality was far grimmer than legend suggests, because behind every warrior was a boy who had grown up cold, hungry, and shaped by a society that valued martial prowess above comfort or safety. If this look into what it actually took to become a Viking changed your perspective on Norse warriors, hit that like button and subscribe for more history that reveals the reality behind the legends. Thanks for watching.